So welcome everyone. Like we said, I'm Nicole Richard. I've been at URI longer than it seems, and I'm feeling older these days. Today I lent my kayak to a student doing some field work, and I can no longer pick it up and put it on the car myself. So that was sad. But so today we are going to talk about cottage food production. I know every state is a little different in how they approach this. So I tried to keep the specifics out as it relates to just Rhode Island. But I'll try to, if I do notice that something that might just be Rhode Island focused, I'll point it out. But if you are interested in cottage food production, you will want to work with your local regulatory authorities to know what is required and allowed in your state, because they do differ by states. So just to start off, good manufacturing practices, or GMPs as we usually call them, sort of create the foundation of food safety practices, whether it's in your home kitchen or in a manufacturing environment. They basically establish a clean process. By following GMPs, you're establishing a clean food processing environment. Their GMPs are designed and managed so that you can safely produce food. And by safety, we're really talking about preventing food safety hazards from causing contamination. And those hazards are usually microbiological that we focus on, but they do also include chemical hazards and physical hazards. And we will talk about those three in this talk. And GMPs basically help to prevent contamination of the food, food contact surfaces, and your food packaging materials. So today we are going to talk about GMPs, and GMPs include a few categories such as personal hygiene. They also include the kitchen that you're working in, or the processing environment, the building and the surrounding area, and how that can impact the safety of your processing space. Cleaning and sanitation is very important. We're going to talk about equipment and utensils and their role in your role in keeping them safe and preventing them from becoming a source of contamination. GMPs also include processes and controls and storing and transportation. So these are all the subcategories we're going to touch on today. So personal hygiene. It's really important that you don't process food if you are feeling ill. And so, this picture makes me laugh because, I don't know, I was a big fan of Barbie growing up. But, if you are ill, or you have, especially if you have symptoms of vomiting, diarrhea, or a sore throat with a fever, then that indicates you could be very contagious and you could transfer illness through food. So it's important that you don't process food if you're ill. Another thing to consider is if you have open lesions on your hands or arms or anything that's touching or near the food, because that can cause Staph aureus that's naturally on our skin. It could get in the food, and if it gets in the food and the food is held at room temperature, the staph can produce a toxin, and that can make people very ill. One of the things that I don't really touch on in this workshop that I'll just mention briefly is just there are different ways in which bacteria can make us ill. And in some cases, they are just the cells of the bacteria are multiplying and the numbers can cause someone to become ill. In another situation, the bacteria might produce a toxin in the food. And when you consume the toxin that's in the food, you become ill. Once a toxin is formed, you can't cook it out. You can't really eliminate it. So the goal is really prevention. And with bacteria, sometimes you can cook it and kill it. But, you don't want to just let bacteria grow. So you really want to minimize bacterial growth and prevent toxin formation when you're handling food. If you do have cuts on your hands, it's really important to maybe put a Band-Aid on and a glove over that Band-Aid. Use Band-Aids that aren't skin color so that they stand out if they fall off and get in the food as well. So good personal hygiene includes bathing, keeping ourselves clean, wearing clean clothes. If you're producing vegetables that you harvest from the garden, you should change your clothes between harvesting and production. You can wear hair restraints, remove unsecured jewelry, and remove hand jewelry that cannot be sanitized. So wedding bands are acceptable to wear if you're producing food, but if you have like a stone in it or grooves, it's not a physical hazard of the stone falling out. It's about those grooves and areas that could harbor bacteria that can sort of fall out into the food. So ideally take off all your jewelry because that's a better practice, but you want to make sure that you don't have situations that could support the growth of bacteria that can contaminate the food. If you have a beard, I think if the beard is a certain length, then you should consider wearing a beard guard, but it's just, a good practice to minimize hair getting into food. We were eating takeout the other day and my husband's munching away on his chicken sandwich, and all of a sudden this beard hair was there. And like, there's something grosser about a thick, coarse beard hair than like a long strand of thinner hair. But you just want to really minimize, it's not a safety issue, but you want to minimize things like that because people get grossed out. So hand hygiene, this is one of the most important things you can do. Wash your hands. I have a lot of neurotic issues around hand washing. I don't like touching doors. I don't like, unless I can wash my hands after. I really don't like when you go into a restroom and you can't, and there's no waste basket near the door. So I try to shoot my paper towel into the garbage can, but if it doesn't make it, I feel bad and I walk out. But hand washing is so important, and it's one of the most important things you can do to prevent contamination and to keep a clean processing space. So it's important that you wash your hands thoroughly. Hand antiseptics, although we use them a lot, especially during COVID, they're not a replacement for hand washing. They're not better. Washing with soap and water is the best thing you can do. The hand antiseptics are not effective if your hands are very dirty, and they're not effective against norovirus, which is what causes us, it's the vomiting, the stomach bug is usually norovirus. And the hand antiseptics do not neutralize norovirus if it were on your hands. So soap and water is the best thing you can do. If you have cuts on your hands, like we mentioned, it's really important that you consider covering them. With ready-to-eat food, I know in Rhode Island, I'm not sure if it's like this in every state, but it's in the food code that your state or town has adopted. But ready-to-eat foods, usually you can't have bare hand contact with the ready-to-eat food, so you want to use a utensil or like a paper cloth or disposable thing that you could pick up the food with. So be aware of that and know what is allowed in your state. If you use single-use disposable gloves, it's important that you use them correctly. In Rhode Island, we do not allow latex gloves. Different states might have different allowances, but be aware that some people are allergic to latex. So it might be wise to look for a non-latex glove. You need to wash your hands thoroughly before you put gloves on. And then you need to change your gloves anytime you would normally wash your hands. A lot of the times the issue with the gloves is that people kind of forget that they're there to protect the food. And because they don't feel like their hands are getting dirty, there's sort of a disassociation between when to change the gloves. So just be aware of when there's contamination on the gloves, you need to change them. Washing your hands, sometimes they say sing happy birthday, but essentially you want to scrub your hands for about 20 seconds with soap and water, rinse it, and then dry your hand with a paper towel or a clean cloth that hasn't been used for anything else. You want to make sure you wash your hands before starting work, after using the restroom, in between tasks where they might become contaminated. If you eat and drink, you want to wash them before returning to production. Anytime your hand gets dirty, and the goal is to prevent contamination of the food or the food processing environment. So now we're going to talk about some other practices that you can do. You want to make sure if you're producing food in your home kitchen that you're separating what you're producing for your food business from what you're producing for your living life. So try to find ways that you can separate foods during production and then during storage. It's important that you don't eat, chew gum, or smoke in the kitchen while you're processing food. And you can drink water, but you need to make sure that it's in a cup with a closed lid. So it's in Rhode Island, we require that cottage food production operators or managers take a food handler or a manager certification training. And these trainings target retail food service operations, and it's a great background on food safety practices throughout the production for retail establishments. So we require that folks who are producing food for their cottage food business have this training. You should find out if it's required in your state, but either way, it's advisable to take it if it's not requirement, because it's a really great background information on food safety. And then what you want to do is just understand your process from getting ingredients into your kitchen, through the production and just identify where potential problems could exist. Like, do you have a cat? Do you need to exclude them from the kitchen? Maybe if you put one gate up, the cat can still jump. So maybe you need to think about ways that you can prevent problems from happening during production. You want to make sure that you're maintaining your property around the kitchen in a way that will prevent contamination, such as like, your septic system. You want to make sure that garbage is sort of secured in a container and not open for animals to come in and get through into it. And the most important in your kitchen is really just thinking about mice. I know in New England, we have mice and they poop, and their poop can contain bacteria that can make people very sick. I made the mistake of having a soft heart last winter, and there was this rodent in my outdoor shed. And my husband and I were like, oh, it's cute, let's let it live. And then in the spring, when I went into the shed, I was disgusted at the volume of feces that I had to clean. And so I will never do that again. I even went as far as to get the traps that you trap mice in and then release them, but they stunk so bad. So I went back to the good old killing traps. But it's hard. It's hard. I have a hard time killing things, but sometimes it has to be done. So, you really need to prevent rodents and animals from becoming a source of contamination, because they, especially rodents and things like that, they can carry a lot of diseases. Okay, so in your kitchen while you're producing, you need to think about how your space will allow you to separate clean equipment and cooking supply utensils and things from the dirty. So you need to, allow for maintenance and sanitary operations to have sufficient space to place equipment but that's clean and separate it from that's dirty. You need to make sure that you can store your equipment and your packaging materials and your processed food in a clean area. And you need to think through how you can clean and sanitize the space you're working in and the equipment that you're using. So how are you going to handle your dirty utensils prior to washing? How will you handle the cleaned utensils after washing? Everyone has a different sort of space in their kitchen. I have a very small kitchen. So, the less space, the more you have to think it through to find a system that works. And you want to just kind of like flow through the production, like dirty to clean or clean to dirty, so that you minimize the risk of dirty stuff contaminating the clean stuff. So in your kitchen, it's important that you keep it clean and in good repair. And by good repair, I mean, if you have a fan in your ceiling, how often do you clean it? Is it on when you're producing? Maybe you turn it off, because fans can get very dusty. And even though dust isn't such a huge issue, it could have mold spores, things like that. So, look up, look down, look all around. You want to inspect your food contact surfaces regularly, your floors, walls, ceilings, your ventilation systems and fans, light fixtures. You want to make sure that a broken light can't fall into your food and have broken glass shards. So you need to look around your kitchen space. You need to consider your food contact surfaces as well. You want surfaces that are non-absorbent, corrosion resistant, smooth, durable, and easy to clean. And we all have different kinds of countertops. I used to live in a house that had a wooden countertop, and I don't really know how it was sealed. I was just renting. So, it depends on what you have, but just think, is this an adequate food contact surface that I can easily clean and sanitize that isn't going to absorb odors and food and things like that? So flies are another gross thing. My mother-in-law and father-in-law love to leave the door open so that their dogs can freely come and go in the house. But what happens is they get a lot of flies in their house, and it's disgusting. So make sure that you take measures to prevent pests from getting into your house. Make sure you don't have holes in your screens. Close the doors, minimize flies. Flies can transfer germs. You also want to make sure that you have adequate lighting in your food preparation areas so that you can see what you're doing with enough light. So for cleaning and sanitizing, You want to make sure the cleaning compounds and sanitizing agents that you use are appropriate for food processing operations. So, usually you clean, then you sanitize, and I'll talk through that in a moment. But with bleach, if you were to use bleach as a sanitizer, not all bleaches are created equal. So you want to make sure it's an unscented bleach. You want to make sure it's an unscented bleach. Hold on. Okay, there you got it. An unscented bleach, because the scented bleaches might have residues that will remain on the food contact surface that you don't want to be ingesting. If you look at the label of the bleach bottle, if they have instructions for how to use it on a food contact surface, that means it's appropriate. If you don't see directions for that, keep looking for the right kind of bleach. So the label will indicate that it's approved for use with food. If you put bleach or any cleaner in a secondary container, make sure that you appropriately label it and store it safely. Don't store it above your food. Store it in a manner where if something happened and it leaked, it won't contaminate anything. Usually, store it in a bucket or below your sink. So this is a busy slide, but it's just sort of pointing out that if you look at the label on your cleaning and sanitizing solutions, you'll see how it can be used. And so for this one, we have an EPA registration number, and that means that you can use it. You want to make sure that you're using a cleaner and sanitizer that's EPA registered. Usually it includes directions for use on how to use it on food contact surfaces. And it will have other information. So when you clean and sanitize, you want to make sure that you clean and sanitize the equipment that you're using in your kitchen before production, especially if it's been stored for like a year or so. You want to make sure that you clean before you sanitize, because sanitizers are ineffective on dirty equipment. And then if you're using equipment and tools in your kitchen, you should stop and clean and sanitize every 4 hours. And then when you clean, you want to use new paper towels or clean cloths to wipe up spills. One thing you can do is if you have a sanitizer that you make up fresh, you can leave the cloth in that sanitizing solution, but you shouldn't use the cloth and then let it sit out and then use it again later. Either use a clean cloth or leave it in the sanitizing solution. And I will say, bleach solutions usually need to be made fresh because they do evaporate and lose their potency over time. So like I mentioned, cleaning should be done first, and this is just the removal of visible soil and food on a plate or a knife. Sanitizing is where you are reducing the numbers of harmful microorganisms to a safe level. So before you start, you want to make sure that you wash your food preparation area, your countertops, and your utensils and equipment. You can use hot soapy water and rinse with hot water, or wash it in a dishwasher. And then you want to do the same thing after preparing food and in between different foods sometimes. You should wash your countertops with hot soapy water and rinse after preparing each food and before preparing the next. So hot water sanitizing can be done in the dishwasher. Most dishwashers, or the dishwasher should reach at least 150 degrees Fahrenheit. I believe most newer ones will, and they, if not, go higher. But not all household dishwashers can sanitize, so just be aware of that. For chemical sanitizing, the cheapest thing you can use is chlorine bleach. So for a food business, you need to make sure that it has an EPA label for registration. The concentration that's allowable on food contact surfaces is 50 to 100 ppm. And you want to make that with potable water. And do not add ammonia or vinegar to the chlorine, because that can make you sick. It can produce a gas. And again, like I said, household, like fragrant bleaches are not acceptable. So you want an unfragrant bleach. So there's commercial germicidal bleach, which contains about 8.25% sodium hypochlorite. So to make a 100 ppm solution, you would mix a half tablespoon of bleach per gallon of water. So you want to make sure you're using roughly room temperature water. You don't want it to be you don't want hot water. Bleach does come in several concentrations. So if it's not a germicide, so look at the concentration on the label to see what the percentage of sodium hypochlorite is. and then follow the label instructions, but make sure that it agrees with the food code, because the label might tell you to make a stronger concentration than the food code allows. The food code, I believe, is like a 50 ppm. You can use test strips like you see in the picture to confirm the concentration, and you just sort of dip the stick into the liquid sanitizer and compare the colors with the picture of colors on the side of the bottle. And with bleach, you want to make it fresh daily. So if you're sanitizing, you want to immerse the thing in the equipment or whatever in a sanitizing solution, or you can apply a fine spray, and you want to let the spray or the item sit in the sanitizer for 1 to 2 minutes if you're using bleach. And then you need to air dry the foods, and this will prevent recontamination of the sanitized items, and you never want to rinse after sanitizing. So, and again, this process sort of is in the food code. And for those who don't know, it's the FDA food code. And if you search on the internet, FDA food code, you'll find it. There's different versions. So you need to know what version your state or town follow. Some are still on older versions. Actually, many are probably still on the older versions. So for sanitary operations, cleaned and sanitized equipment and utensils should be stored in a manner that will protect them from becoming contaminated. So, maybe you have a cupboard or a pantry where you can store things. You should store them upside down. You can always use a drawer or some sort of like plastic container or bucket. Make sure it's covered, and use clean hands when you're putting the clean and sanitized equipment away. So one thing that's really important to think about is allergens, because this isn't something we can see or smell. And so know what foods are allergens. There are 9 allergens, and I do have a slide in a moment, but you need to prevent cross contact between food allergens and food contact surfaces. So, you need to think your kitchen is being used for your home meal preparation and for your cottage food business. So you'd probably have allergens in there so it's a good idea to clean and sanitize before preparing food for your cottage food business to make sure that any allergens aren't there. You can remove allergens by cleaning. It's not the sanitizing, it's the cleaning step. So other things you can do are segregating your allergenic food ingredients, and sort of like it creates a heightened awareness when you take them out to produce with them. But you need to make sure you wash with soap and water to really remove the food protein that contains the allergen from the food surface or equipment. And alcohol-based sanitizers are not effective at removing allergen proteins. So the FDA has 9 major food allergens that are responsible for the majority of the food allergic reactions that people have. People do have food allergies to other foods, but these are the 9 major ones that the US wants you to take precaution for. So you take precaution by cleaning in between and preventing cross contact, and also making sure that your food is labeled. So for cleaning and sanitizing, you want to make sure that you have a potable water supply that's sufficient to process and clean and sanitize stuff in your kitchen. You want to make sure that the plumbing in your house is not a source of contamination. You might consider looking to see if you have backflow prevention, so that if there's a dip in pressure or some other issue, that contaminated water can't come spewing out of your sink. You want to make sure your toilet is working and that you have a good sewage disposal system. I believe oh gosh, I can't remember, but there's something where like the bathroom can't be on the kitchen, or it needs a certain kind of door. So if you have a bathroom off your kitchen, you might need to talk to your regulatory authority to just ensure that things are appropriate. And if you have a garbage disposal, you want to make sure that you have a good system so that you don't have garbage piling up in your kitchen and that you don't attract pests outside. So for equipment, sometimes you might need to use a thermometer to measure the temperature of the food that you're making, or if you're storing it refrigerated, to monitor the temperature of your refrigerator. So you want to make sure that the thermometer that you're using is calibrated and that you're using it properly. For raw materials and ingredients, you can apply GMPs from the receipt of ingredients through delivery of the product. So inspect the ingredients when you receive them at purchasing. Handle raw fruits and vegetables to ensure food safety. Processing operations, you want to apply GMPs throughout the production process. This includes the equipment and utensils that you use, the food processing, such as packaging of the products. Anything that you need to monitor, like the thermometer, you want to make sure that it's clean and sanitary before you stick it in the food. And if you have to hold food hot, you need to make sure, or cold, you want to make sure that you can appropriately measure that temperature. Another thing that's really good is record keeping. So you should keep a recipe with your ingredients and the quantities used, and your any bake times, things like that. You should keep the certificate of your license somewhere in your kitchen. And another thing that we recommend is batch coding the products. So if you just say you were canning something and then you discovered there was a problem, if you batch code, you can at least figure out where you went wrong. You probably can't find all the people that purchased from you and things like that, but it is a good practice. And if you plan to grow out of the cottage food into a production facility, it's something that you're going to be required to do. So there are acceptable storage areas, such as your kitchen. Maybe there's a spare bedroom in your house, or if you have a dry, clean, cool basement, you could also store foods there. The garage, a barn, or other outbuilding that doesn't have temperature control might not be acceptable. And then some areas are considered poor, such as under the sink, or above the stove, or any place that's damp or has a lot of temperature extremes. And then finally, when you're transporting the food, you want to make sure that you also protect it from contamination then. And last, labeling. I don't know what the labeling requirements are in different states, but in Rhode Island, you have to have your name, address, where you produce the food, and a telephone number. And then you should have a list of the ingredients in descending order by weight or volume. Definitely put allergen information on. And then the statement in red is required, made by a cottage food business registrant that is not subject to routine government food safety inspection. And again, this is specific to Rhode Island. So just make sure that they check with your state requirements for labeling for the cottage food business. And so I used the food code to gather a lot of this information. The food code is a great resource for cottage food industry, because that would be the how you're regulated.